Well, thanks, Clinton. Thanks, everyone, for joining in today. I know that you have busy schedules, and we will have a rapid fire session here. I don't know how many of you were at the December conference. I'd love to hear who is on. If you want to put your name out there, and if you don't, that's perfectly fine. But if you haven't been with me before, I live on a farm in Indiana. I'm actually overlooking heifers grazing in the snow or trying to graze and chewing their cud right now. So I am tried and true in this business and love it, and really have worked to try to equip people like yourself to have better conversations around agriculture. And so when Food and Farm Care asked me to come in and work as a continuation of some of the things that we have done, the first topic that we wanted to touch on is really being able to talk about today's agriculture and modern practices today, because it seems as though many consumers have questions. But I think more importantly, as this farmer put it so eloquently, it is beyond time for agriculture to step up and help shape what we want for our future. Because if we don't step up, then we don't know what our right to farm is going to be. And so if you're a bottom line person who wants to know the facts and feel that this is public relations fluff, to me right there is a great reason to be able to talk more effectively about today's agriculture. You couple that with the science that so many of us want to use so often in this conversation, and I think that we have to take a step back. I actually asked on my Facebook a couple of years ago now, who has damaged the credibility of science? And you can see that I have a wide variety of responses from both the States and Canada about who has damaged the credibility of science. And it goes anything from activists to corporate profit to apathy to fear of the unknown and not having the entire results published and so forth. So I think aside from even knowing that we have to connect on an emotional level or a values level, we also have to realize that science doesn't have the same credibility that it used to. And to be crystal clear, I am not anti-science whatsoever. I am very pro-science. But the reality is we can't lead the conversation with science. We have to lead it through story. And so this next slide really comes up, and this shows you the 25 food truths from my book, Food Truths from Farm to Table, but that's not why I put it on there. I put it on there because it's a great example of being able to lead the conversation with story. And some of the truths that we are going to be addressing today is that organic farming is about production methods, not nutritional value. Now, if you're an organic producer, I welcome you, and I will absolutely advocate for your right to farm organically. Likewise, I will advocate for someone's right to use GMOs as well, because it is about a choice. And I think that in each of these examples, you'll see that I've tried to position it positively rather than negatively, because one of the greatest challenges we have is agriculture is so incredibly independent. I don't care whether you're in the States or Canada, we're not great at working together. So I really want to try to encourage you all to look at these food truths and the opportunity to tell the stories in a positive, proactive way. Another one that we're going to be covering today is food truth number 10. Genes are the coolest ingredient on your plate. I happen to really believe that as a Holstein breeder since the age of 9. I am amazed by what genetics can do. But I'll also be honest and tell you that this was one of the hardest food truths that I found the right phrasing for, because it does address biotechnology, GMOs, but it also addresses the incredible breeding and technology that we use in agriculture. And the reason why I positioned it the way that it is, genes are the coolest ingredient on your plate, is because one, is positive, and two, it draws attention away from the incredible emotionalism surrounding GMOs. So that is another one that we'll be talking about as an example today. And I really hope that you guys will ask questions. If you've seen me speak, you know I prefer to be very interactive. We have a bunch of polls, and I love to hear from the folks that are on there. So please do jot down your questions. I am happy to answer them throughout the webinar. Do not hold them until the end, because I want to be sure that we can address what you all are looking for. Another food truth that kind of is the underlying premise of most of my work and what you heard at the beginning here is that food is an amazing science from farm to table. So many people don't understand the science that there is in food. For example, one of the statistics that always makes people laugh is Jason Luss did a study several years ago that showed that 75% of people think that their food should be labeled if it has DNA in it. And yes, I did say DNA. So I think what's really sad about that is they don't know that there's science in their food, and as a result, they don't trust their food because you don't trust what you don't understand. And whether that's chemicals, whether that's technology, or whether that's genetics or animal welfare, that is a huge challenge for us as we try to talk about modern agriculture. And then one of the things that we're putting in here, because it is certainly an essential issue, is food waste. Food truth number 14 is the answer to food waste is hidden in your refrigerator. I think it's interesting how many times people try to point fingers in our farm and food system. 40% of the food in the United States is thrown away. I would imagine Canada is probably very similar to that. The challenge that we have is to help people understand their food, help them understand their expiration dates, but we also have to take responsibility in agriculture to do a better job of recycling and to make sure that we're doing everything we can to prevent food waste. And then food truth number 22 is one of the things that we'll be talking about. Choice on the farm and choice on the plate involve an balancing act. As I'd already alluded to, I support all sizes and shapes of agriculture. I believe that it is a family's choice as to how they want to farm or ranch. Likewise, as a mom, I believe it's my choice as to how I'm going to purchase food for my family. And so I think that one of the stories that we need to help people understand is that it is very much about choice, and everybody is entitled to make their own choice that is best for their family. So as I said, the list of food truths is up there just to give you a little bit of an idea. In the future webinars, we will be covering the top 4 in the animal one for sure, and then we'll be covering chemicals, sustainability, soils, and a few others in the crop and grain runs. So we will get through all of them, and if you have any questions about any of those, please feel free to ask. So to step away a little bit from some of the issues, one of the things that we wanted to provide you with was a simple to use action plan to take home. This is in your handouts. If you go to the handout section, which should be on the right side, you actually will find 2 handouts. One of those is the list of food truths, the graphic that I just shared. And the second one is the Translating Farm to Food Action Plan. So that the action plan is actually a PDF that you can fill out if you are the type of person who likes to write out your thoughts, and you can determine exactly what you want your action plan to be. I can tell you that I've worked with thousands of people developing this action plan for advocacy, and it works. I've seen farmers do amazing things. For example, I saw a farmer who was in a leadership class with Iowa Farm Bureau that I worked with a few years ago. And he actually put together an entire day that included all of their commodity organizations, so beef, pork, corn, and soybeans, and dairy, had them all go to a local grocery store, worked with the grocery store to put together a special promotion, and they had a day celebrating agriculture where they had all sorts of information, and more importantly, farmers out shaking people's hands, and the grocery store was working in concert with the farmers to try to have a more positive impression. So you can see that the action plan is very simple. If you've ever taken a journalism class, you'll recognize it. It's the who, what, why, when, where, and how. So it's about knowing specifically who your target audience is, identifying what their hot button is, which is a passion. So a hot button can be something that's positive or negative, and it does not necessarily have to be related to agriculture. This is the human factor connection, the emotional connection that we'll spend some time talking about. And then the third is really being able to hit those hot buttons and get people excited and to get them engaged and help them understand why agriculture matters. And then the when is investing 15 minutes daily. And I know you all are busy people, but this is my answer to that. Studies have shown conclusively that people tweet from the toilet on a regular basis. So there you go. Everybody can find time. If you're on auto steer, if you're waiting in line, wherever it may be, to be able to share a picture, to share a story, to shake a hand, have a conversation. And then I would really encourage everybody to think big picture, number 5, answering the where, but acting on a local basis. And then the 6 is just pulling the whole plan together in a proactive way. And I can't emphasize that one enough. So those are the 6 basic elements of the action plan. And as I said, you can download that from the handouts. And one of the things, if you were with us in December, I shared these numbers and I've not updated them yet. They do need to be updated, but I think it's important for us to take a look at as to whether we are in the conversation or not. And when you consider the numbers, and my research shows since January of 2009, that, for example, HSUS has 3 million followers on the on Facebook. And while I realize that's not Canada, I also think you understand the impact of that. So the reality that we have to face is that if we're not where the activists are, they are having a voice in talking about agriculture. So the challenge that we have is making sure that we have voices in the conversation. I mean, when you look at HSUS and the fact that they've grown over 100-fold on Twitter, that's terrifying. The same for Greenpeace, who is very active in the anti-GMO movement, and the fact that they have nearly 3 million followers on Facebook, and they've grown on Facebook 25-fold. And then PETA, a considerably more radical group, has had over 450-fold growth on Facebook. And to answer the question that has not been put up on the screen, but I know a lot of people think that there's bots or it's, agriculture folks that are following along that are driving the numbers up. I can tell you it's not, because I can tell you from what they're putting out there, it's incredibly negative, and it unquestionably has had an impact on people's impressions of agriculture. And then Sierra Club, who's quite active against animal agriculture in some of the different states, has had quite a growth on Instagram. So if any of you have questions about these social tools, now is the time to be asking them. If you're not familiar with Instagram, that's the one that many people are not. It's a visual tool. It is nearly exclusively mobile. Instagram is now owned by Facebook, and it is where all the millennials are. It is also the easiest tool that if you have a really great photo of some crops, of equipment, of cattle, hogs, whatever it may be, something you're really proud of, it's a great place to go in, spend 5 seconds, explain the why of what we do in agriculture, and move on. So I am not seeing any questions pop up about social media as of yet, so we're going to move on here. The other one I want to mention real quickly is Pinterest. Pinterest is also a newer player. It is more or less like a virtual bulletin board. Believe it or not, there's actually women out there that get dressed by Pinterest, and there's all sorts of parties planned around Pinterest. It's basically a place where a lot of people go to collect ideas. It's very visual. It also had the highest activity level as far as commercial buy-in, because people were clicking on links in Pinterest. The first 5 years it was out at a higher level than in any of the other social channels. So it's a great way to be able to reach women in particular, because that's the way the demographics skew. But I think it's important just to use this as a backdrop to consider how we are in the conversation. Because as I've shared with many of you that are probably on this webinar before, it is always about feelings. This conversation of talking about today's agriculture, talking animal agriculture, talking crops, is always about feelings and emotions. People will forget the perfect soundbite that you're trained to give. People will forget exactly how you farm, what your career is, but people will never ever forget the way that you make them feel. So I think we all have to step back and ask, how do they feel about where their food comes from? And I'm not so sure it's positive. So at this point, we'd like to put up the first poll and ask for your participation here. And they will put the poll up, and if you could type any other comments that you have into the question box, that would be great. I did focus primarily on today's agriculture, so the modern agriculture concerns. You will see animal agriculture and crop concerns come up specifically in the next 2 webinars. So if you could type those in, that would be great. And Clint and Sarah, I'll let you tell us when it looks like the majority of folks have answered. Interesting. Okay, so the poll results, farm size came in at the lowest response rate as compared to other. And if you typed in other, please put it in the question box. Use of technology in farming came in at the next to lowest at 7%. GMOs came in at 61%, and organic versus conventional came in at 25%. All right, so let's talk about GMOs, and you can go ahead and take the poll down real quick. And I believe, let me make sure I have the next slide up here. There we go, yes. All right, so let's talk about biotechnology and GMO. And if you have a specific concern, okay, a couple of answers in the question box. My question box is not showing anything. So maybe if you can text those to me, that would be great, because I am not showing any questions whatsoever. But taking a look at biotechnology, there we go. Now they're coming up. Conflicting information within our own industry. But whether a product leaves the farm and one of the... And animal welfare is huge. Yes, animal welfare is huge, and we will be discussing about that, as well as hormones and antibiotics in the animal agriculture one. And GMOs, we will be talking about in a variety of places. So if it's an animal agriculture issue, we will talk about that in the next webinar. GMOs, we're going to talk about here in a couple of seconds. And I would love to get your feedback. If you have done a good job of being able to talk about GMOs effectively with people, please share that example. And I will share it with your name attached unless you tell me you would prefer to remain anonymous. Here are the facts around GMOs. By far the most contentious issue, particularly in social media. By far an incredibly emotional issue. If you've ever used the hashtag GMO on Twitter, you probably know that there are some major concerns out there as far from people that are perhaps a little bit radical. And even in common conversation in a grocery store, there's so much confusion because, again, we have to remember we live in a society where people don't understand that there's DNA in their food. We live in a society where they don't understand that their food is comprised of chemicals. And coupled with that, while it's more of an animal agriculture issue, they don't understand that there's hormones in their food. And so it becomes a huge challenge because, again, you don't trust what you don't know. And so biotechnology, one of the best ways that I have found to talk about biotechnology with dietitians, as an example, as a target audience that I have worked on, is to talk to them about the fact that that insulin is a GMO-derived product. And this is the way I usually have the conversation. Did you know that, or do you have anybody in your life that's diabetic? And most people do, and so they'll respond yes. And I'll say, well, did you know that insulin is actually derived through genetic modification from a bacteria? And many people don't know that. And the other way that I will also explain that, and this is an oversimplification and less effective without you being able to see what I'm doing, is to be able to hold up an iPhone. And I do this when I'm around other moms, and I'll say, hey, you know, I've got an iPhone 8 now. I really like it. What kind of phone do you have? And they'll tell me. And then I will say, so if I take Facebook off of my 8 and I put on, oh, let's say Twitter, is it still an 8? And, you know, the answer is typically, duh. And so what I will then ask is, well, how is a corn plant any different than when you turn off one gene and you take a gene from a bacterium and put it in to allow that plant to become naturally resistant to worms? And you can see the light bulbs go off. So one of the best tactics that you can do to explain extremely complex issues such as GMOs is to be sure that, number one, you fully understand it. Because if your target audience is a group of PhDs, you're not going to be able to have the discussion that you've been doing genetic modification for decades and centuries, because what you're in fact talking about is hybridization, and that is entirely different than GMOs. Whereas if your target audience is moms, some of the examples that I gave might be a more effective tool. So those are a couple of examples, and on the food truth that we talked about genes being the coolest ingredient on our plate. At the end of the day, big picture, if your target audience is a group of mommy bloggers or consumers, I think that we have to lead with the consumer benefits first. So for example, when you look at some of the CRISPR technology that's coming down and the anti-browning, that hits a couple of things. Number one, it addresses food waste because, for example, potatoes brown significantly, and they can go into the trash immediately when they are brown. And so reducing food waste is certainly one of those things that you can address through CRISPR technology. And the other is mushrooms, and there's doing some things with oleic oils and so forth, and soybeans. So the whole point is that these issues are not standalone, and that we can be able to make sure that we're addressing a number of those, but we have to lead from a consumer-facing benefit. And I have a comment here that moms can be PhDs as well. Yes, I am very well aware of that. But the point is the differentiation of the audiences is what we're getting at, because the action plan calls for specificity and being able to identify very specific target audiences, if that makes sense. Okay, the other one that a lot of folks didn't feel was a concern, which I'm a little surprised at, is farm size. So most of my consumer research shows that big is bad and small is good. And by way of reference, if you don't know me, I don't necessarily subscribe to that thought, but that is the general consensus. Big is bad because it's industrial agriculture and it's factory agriculture. So if you're farming several thousand acres, if you are milking several thousand cows, whatever it may be, if you have a large quota, then you're large, quote, industrial factory farming, unquote, which again, I do not believe is bad. Whereas smaller farms can absolutely have problems as well, but typically people gravitate towards the Charlotte Web mentality, the diversified farm, small, where the animals talk, everybody's happy, nobody dies. I'm being a little sarcastic here. But I think that it's really important that we do an effective job of explaining why we have the size of farms and ranches that we do today. So I put the Real Dirt on Farming up there as an example, and that is out of the Farm and Food Care Ontario is what I understand. And they do a great job of putting a face on farms. And I think when it comes to farm size, what I have seen quite consistently is if you have a conversation about being able to focus on farm size and explaining why your family has to grow is usually a positive thing for people. So that talks a little bit about farm size. Sustainability, we'll talk about real quickly, and then we're going to keep moving on. One of the challenges about sustainability is there's 300 different definitions of it. And you have to decide what definition fits you. For me, sustainability is not only about the environment, it's about the community, and it's about the business. And so when I wrote about sustainability and food truths from farm to table, what I tried to focus on was that a sustainable business has to last for generations and contribute to the community. And what I did as a part of that was to not only show the farm practices and the way that modern technology has an advantage in some of those farm practices, but also showed the economic impact of farms and ranches in a community. And there's some really great studies that were actually out of the University of Minnesota that showed how much farms spend on average in their community. I'm sure it's different for Canada, but the whole point here is that you have to consider economics and as part of the sustainability message. However, you can't lead with economics, because the whole goal in connecting with feelings is being able to help people understand that you're a human being first, and that you're just not driven by profit. So I would encourage you to keep that in mind as you're talking about some of these different issues. I'm going to check in on questions right now. So the question was about whether we are targeting specific consumers versus a segment. We only have one chance really with a tweet. Does that mean different messages for different media or sprinkle across the targets? That means that I would encourage you to select a singular target audience for an action plan as you're getting going. If you've been doing this for a while, by all means, select a few. But if you're just looking for a quick hit on being able to talk about today's agriculture, figure out what target audience that it is. And if Twitter is your where you're going to do this, then you have to find the hashtags and the conversations and the chats that are happening around that particular target audience. Some of this can be done in real life. As a matter of fact, I would encourage a lot of it to be done in real life. And then you have the opportunity to have some different messages. And yes, you do tweet differently than you talk in person typically. Sometimes it's the same. But if you're a more advanced advocate and you've been doing this, then yes, you can have 3 different target audiences. And yes, you will find that some of those messages resonate with different audiences. As an example, elected officials. Do you talk to an elected official the same as you talk to media? And I'll let you laugh about that one. But the point is that you want to be able to have conversations that make sense to the very specific target audience that you work with. When I go in and I talk to our local elementary school students, I have very different conversations than I do when I'm on Ag Chat on Twitter, if that makes sense. So we're going to move on some of these. I think we've addressed most of the major issues. And the way that I can best boil this down is the opportunity to talk about food being raised the right way by the right people for the right reasons. I wrote 100,000 words when I drafted Food Truths from Farm to Table, have 55 different contributors from both sides of the border in there, and that is the easiest way that I can synthesize that book, is raised the right way by the right people for the right reasons. And I would encourage you to remember that it is very much an intersection of head and heart, because you can't just have all heart and emotions, because that's called sensationalism. That yes, we eventually do have to have science enter in the conversation, and we have to use our heads to do this well. It's just that we can't lead with the science and data. And that farm is not the only side of the plate. Food is a huge side of the plate, and we have to remember people all around the plate. And that does not mean that food only leads the conversation. My hope is that more people on the farm side get out there. So if everybody can take a look here, what do you see on your screen here? I'm going to see who can type really fast. I don't know if anybody will. Because when you consider what is the right way, and you consider what is the right way to agriculture and what is the right way to consumers, they can be 2 very different perspectives. So you can see that these are seed corn signs. I mean, flat out and simple. And I have a variety of answers typically come in, anything from GMOs to brands to companies or so forth. I put this in here because of the perspective check that it provides. Illinois Farm Families, about 4 or 5 years ago, I did a study and found that consumers believe that these signs, these seed corn signs, represent who owns the field. And many people laugh at that, but when you step back, you kind of go, aha. Because think about real estate signs, think about company signs. And if someone has never been on a farm, why would they know that these signs do not represent ownership? A study out of Michigan State a few years ago actually showed that 75% of people have not been on a farm or ranch in the last 5 years. So my question is how are they going to know what is the right way to farm if they've not been on a farm and you're not taking the opportunity to talk with them in a way that makes sense to them, that allows them to relate to agriculture? So I always put that one up there just as a reminder that there's a lot of different perspectives around the food plate, and we have to be a bit more cognizant of those than agriculture. And likewise, I would always encourage us to remember that we have to evaluate whether we're doing things the right way. And the next one is really, who are the right people? So when you consider who are the right people in agriculture, who are the right people that are raising the food, this really gets into the human factor. I don't know how many of you know Dale Leftwich, but Dale actually was a contributor to Food Truths from Farm to Table. He is in the baking section for canola oil. And I did an extensive Skype interview with him and had no idea that this was going to come up. But Dale started talking about how his daughter was diagnosed as a diabetic when she was 9, and that she has the quality of life that she has because of GMOs. And here we were talking all about farm practices, and I was learning more about canola, and I was getting down to the very specific of exactly what happened during preparing the soil and during harvest and so forth. And all of a sudden he tells me this very human story. And I don't know how many of you had the chance to see the Facebook Live that I did actually with he and his daughter, but it was really a nice way to show the right people of agriculture. And so there's a lot of different ways to farm, and there's a lot of different ways to ranch. And I don't know how many of you have gotten into a smackdown as far as getting into arguments on Facebook and such, but I would encourage you to remember that it's the human stories every time that make a difference. So one of the stories that I shared in Food Truths from Farm to Table that was actually very hard for me to share was I was taking care of a loved one with cancer while I was writing the book. And I asked the head oncologist at the IU Bone Marrow Transplant Center, so we're talking premier physician, how on earth this cancer happened and if chemicals were involved. And he said, without hesitation, we don't know. We simply know that there's a variety of causes out there. So I share that story. I shared it in the book, not because I think cancer is something that most people enjoy talking about, but because it's a human story that relates to a lot of folks that have been involved by a tragic illness. So the point in all of this is who are the right people best comes about through your personal stories. It comes about through your very human, transparent interactions with folks, shaking hands, being willing to listen with an open mind and respond with your heart versus your data sheet. Okay, and that brings us to what are the right reasons? And I would encourage you all to think about what are the right reasons when you consider agriculture. Why are you in agriculture? And I think that this picture, and I have no idea, I will honestly admit, I don't recognize the name, but I pulled this from Instagram because I thought it was a great example. So it's a beautiful shot that most of us can appreciate. But I want you to take a look at this from a consumer standpoint. So let's say that you are Joe consumer and you have never set foot on a farm and you want to understand what's going on there, and you have some real concerns about technology used in today's agriculture. And this thing doesn't look like technology to you, it looks like a robot. And it looks like a robot that maybe is going to spray really bad things on the field. You see the difference in the perspective? And again, I am not anti-chemical, I am not anti-technology, but this is a beautiful shot. Here's what I would encourage you all to do, is when you put shots up like this, or even those that are less beautiful, to put very specifically why you are doing what you are doing. We are applying something that will help us to control bugs. We're applying chemicals to control bugs. We are fertilizing so that we can grow this food, blah, 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 whatever it may be. Because of the fact that this was not my equipment and I wasn't doing this, I can't speak as to what was happening, but I think you get the point. So to give you another example, and this gets more on the animal agriculture side, but I think it applies across modern agriculture as well. My daughter had to call her, or have her first 4-H animal culled just about a week and a half ago. She wouldn't breed back. And I told her I'd put enough money into her and she was done. And so she had to go be culled. And my daughter understands that that is the purpose of this animal's life. And it is a privilege and an honor to take care of her. But of course, this is the first animal she bought when she was 9 years old. She cares deeply for this animal. She dressed her up in bows. We have pictures of the heifer being a superhero. She was a princess at one point. You know, this animal's been dressed up by however many little girls have been over here through the years. My daughter taught her to play tug of war, which was not a wise thing to do as a show animal, by the way, but that's a whole nother story. But the point here is I shared a synopsis of those stories and just said, it's sad to see this animal go. And, I'm not going to lie, yeah, we both were sad about it. But we also know that providing beef is the animal's secondary purpose to providing milk. And so we talked about the why, and that shows the right reasons for what we do. Technology in agriculture isn't always sexy, but is there an environmental reason for why we do what we do? Yes. My question to you is, are you equipped with being able to explain that to folks? Because I think that's really critical, is to answer that why. The why resonates with the emotional connections oftentimes much more effectively than any data does. Okay, so the question that I always have for folks is, when you step back and you think, well, who's the best spokesperson for agriculture? And you consider who's supposed to be out there talking about it. A lot of people like to complain, but they don't want to do anything about it. Well, my suggestion is to take a look in the mirror. If you love agriculture, which I'm assuming you probably do if you're on the webinar, it's your responsibility to share your authentic story. Not mine, not anyone else's. It is your responsibility to be able to lead this conversation and to be able to talk agriculture more effectively. So that will bring us up to our next poll, which is, who will you target in your action plan? Because I would really like to learn a little bit more about who you are interested in targeting. And if you have additional answers, as I'm sure many of you do, please put them in the questions box. And I'm hoping my questions box will refresh. So are you most interested in targeting consumers, media, kids? And those kids can be K through 6, they could be 6 through 12, they could be college age. Oh, gotcha. Very good. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. No one wants to target elected officials. That's actually kind of surprising. And my box did not refresh. Oh, there we go. Yes, very good. Love it, Terry. Terry said that he was going to target retailers and food service who talk to consumers, critically important. So the poll results from top to bottom are 69% are focused on consumers, 3% are focused on media. Kudos and props to you. 21% are focused on kids, and 7% are focused on teachers. Just by way of reference, a number of activist organizations, as well as books by foodie leaders such as Michael Pollan's Omnivore's Dilemma, does target children. And I think there's a number, well, I don't think, there are a number of documentaries out there that target teachers. If you look at my website, causematters.com, my blog from 2 times ago was about a social studies teacher that showed a Chipotle video as a part of their class with no explanation of marketing, no debate or any of that. And I had kids in that class that have messed around with our animals their entire life, asked me why farmers were bad people. So never overlook the value of teachers in that discussion. But as far as the consumers go, I would encourage you to really segment your consumer audience as to what is important to them. Because if you are trying to segment male consumers, which are a huge part of the grocery buying, and actually are the what's the word I'm looking for, the most growing segment, are absolutely critical. And then the retailers and food service is also essential, obviously, with everything that we've had go on in the States, with some retailer decisions as well as food service decisions that are being targeted by activist organizations. That is critical. And another one that's not on there that I would encourage you all to think about are dietitians, and being able to target them, because obviously obesity is a huge issue in our country, and they oftentimes are a filter to people's perspective on food. So one of the things that I want to encourage you to do is, rather than go helter-skelter in your advocacy plans and being able to talk about agriculture today, is to encourage you to really commit to a targeted action plan. One that's proactive, one that not only draws on your passion, but also on other people's passion. And my hope is that you can use it to empower others, because often results build on results. And so if you're seeing some results from some of your work, whether it's in person in a classroom or whether it's on Instagram or YouTube or wherever it may be, that's something you can use to help others. So just a quick review. These are the who, what, why, where, when, and how of the action plan. And again, I would really encourage you to focus on number 2 and knowing what their hot button is so that you can connect with them on a heart level. I'm asking you to spend 15 minutes a day to be able to connect with people all around the plate. And where you do it is up to you. I've provided a number of examples on here. I obviously can't illustrate in person real well, but the green photo down in the bottom right with the guy sitting by the microphone is a hog farmer in Iowa who's getting ready to do a radio interview. The bottom right photo from CNN is Brian Scott, who's from right here in Indiana, who blogs occasionally for Eatocracy on CNN. And he actually shared his entire GMO contract in both of my books, just in the interest of being able to share with others about what GMOs are and if farmers are controlled or not. And then another great way is to invite people to your farm. And I know there's a number of folks that do that or are engaged in those types of activities to be able to show exactly what's happening. But please always remember to explain the why. And one of the great places that I think is currently underutilized in explaining the why is a Facebook Live or even a quick Instagram story about why we do the practices that we do in agriculture. So you can see in the bottom left, Dusty Hahn actually did a write-up for me in the book on hoof rot and using antibiotics. And I happened to be out of Montana speaking, so he came and picked me up. We went to his ranch and we did a Facebook Live for about 23 minutes, and people loved seeing the scenery there. So many times people just want to see where their food comes from, which is why I put the real dirt on farming back on here, because the photos that were in there were just phenomenal. And again, it gives a face to agriculture. So my question to you, and this is the last poll, is where are you plan to discuss today's agriculture? And I would like to know, one of the things that a lot of folks have discovered is that their extended family gatherings is a great way to do that through social media, agriculture meetings, community organizations, schools, or other. And you certainly please put your other in the questions box, and there's several of you that have been doing that. I'd like to know specifically where you're planning on being able to talk about today's agriculture. And we will be wrapping up shortly after that. And then I was just told that apparently the introduction did not broadcast, so sorry about that, but we will have that at the end again. All right, so we have lots of folks that are interested in social media, and I would be curious as to if there's any specific channels. And my handle at mpaynespeaker has been up throughout the presentation, so I would encourage you to connect. I always love to see people. Extended family gatherings, great, and a wonderful way to lead that conversation is to ask people, how do you feel about where your food comes from? And then you have to promise me you won't throw food, please. Community organizations, schools are both really excellent ways to be able to connect with other folks that are outside of the choir. So, all right, I think we're ready for the poll to go down now. There we go, thank you. All right, so again, in summary, it's about being able to talk agriculture and thinking about it from a food standpoint, looking around the plate and helping people understand that food is raised the right way by the right people for the right reasons. It makes for a much more peaceful conversation around food. And in closing, I would offer you this proverb because it's something that I believe in so strongly, so I put it in every presentation. If you want 1 year of prosperity, you can grow grain, whether it would be canola, whether it would be lentils, or whether it would be corn. If you want a decade of prosperity, you can grow almonds or peaches or apples. But if you want a lifetime of prosperity, it's about growing people. Agriculture through and through is a people business, and I would encourage you to talk today's agriculture effectively through some of these different food truths that we have shared and being able to connect with people's hot buttons. Farm and Food Care does a great job on doing that. So Clint, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and hopefully you can share with folks what you wanted to share.
Yes, sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties here off the start, but I do want to say thank you for everybody for getting on this webinar, and please don't leave. If you do have questions, please post them in the side column on the right-hand side. You can post your questions, and Michelle will go through them after I'm done here. But I did want to just give an overview of Farm and Food Care Saskatchewan. We are a nonprofit organization that's focused on connecting consumers to food and farming, and we do this by having a lot of these engaging conversations that Michelle's talked about it on this webinar, all in an effort to build trust for agriculture. Aside from these webinars and some of the other things we do offer some training opportunities, including Speak Up training, which offers confident conversations to help build trust with consumers, to have them learn more about food and farming. Media training, which is more of a high level and very professional media training for those who will be or could be involved in the media spotlight. Farm tour training, which focuses on how to plan and effectively deliver farm tours, as well as general presentations focusing on building trust in agriculture. So this was the first in a series of 3 webinars. The next webinar will take place on March the 22nd, and its focus is on animal agriculture, while the third is focusing on crop agriculture. You will receive an email after this is done that indicates that you can register for those other 2 webinars as well. If you miss that, you can always go to our website and register directly right there. So if there are any questions, I'll just hand it back over to Michelle. We don't have any questions?
Yeah, I haven't seen any pop up either. So I'm just trying to make sure. Last call, I would say, if anybody has questions.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for participating in this webinar. Thank you very much, Michelle, for all your information, and we look forward for the next 2 webinars.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.